Every single second, trillions of cells inside your body are basically screaming for one thing: oxygen. It is the fuel that makes everything go. But have you ever stopped to wonder how that oxygen gets from your lungs all the way down to, say, your pinky toe? I mean, it can't just float there on its own. It needs a ride. It needs a chauffeur. So let's meet the tiny molecular machines that act as the body's ultimate delivery service.
Okay, so first up, meet myoglobin. This little protein is found deep inside your muscle tissue, and its entire job revolves around oxygen. You can think of it as the local warehouse manager, making sure your muscles have a ready-to-go stockpile of oxygen for when you need it.
And that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's this incredibly delicate dance. If it holds on too tight, the oxygen is useless because it never gets delivered. But if it lets go too easily, you can't build up a reserve. So biology had to come up with a perfect solution to this very tricky design problem.
To really get how this works, we need to zoom in and understand the basic rules of the game, the physics of how these molecules actually interact. And it all boils down to something we can think of as a molecular handshake. The official term for this is protein-ligand binding. You've got your protein, in our case myoglobin, and it shakes hands with a ligand, which for us is oxygen. Now, the key word on this whole slide is reversible. This isn't a superglued handshake. It's one that can be started and, crucially, ended. That's what lets the protein pick up its passenger and then drop it off later.
Now, here's where it gets really, really cool. This isn't just a metaphor. We can actually measure the strength of that handshake. We can put a precise number on just how clingy a protein is with its partner.
And that number is called the dissociation constant, or KD for short. Now, I know, it sounds a little technical, but the concept is actually pretty simple. The KD tells you how much of a ligand, like oxygen, needs to be floating around for exactly half of the protein's hands to be full. It's basically a scorecard for how much they want to hold on to each other. So here's the main takeaway. The only thing you really need to remember: a low KD means high affinity. That's our clingy handshake. It doesn't take much oxygen around for this protein to grab on and hold on tight. A high KD, well, that's the opposite. A loose, flimsy handshake. It lets go much more easily.
And you can see this perfectly on a graph like this one. This curve shows you how full the protein gets as you add more ligand. And that KD value is just the concentration you find right at that 50% full mark. It's a super clear visual way to measure that molecular clinginess we were talking about. All right, so with all that in mind, let's circle back to our first protein, myoglobin. We know it's in our muscles. So what kind of handshake does it have? Is it clingy or is it loose?
Well, if you look at its structure, myoglobin is a beautifully simple machine. It's just one single folded chain of protein, and its whole purpose is to create this perfect little pocket to protect one single oxygen-binding unit called a heme group. It's a specialist. One protein, one binding site, one job.
And its binding curve tells you everything you need to know. Look how steeply that line shoots up. That means myoglobin fills up with oxygen really fast, even when there isn't much oxygen around. Its KD, or P50 when we're talking about gases, is incredibly low. This is a protein with a very, very firm, clingy handshake. It's not a delivery truck, it's an oxygen vault.
And right there, that's the catch. Being an amazing oxygen vault makes you a pretty terrible oxygen taxi. Myoglobin is so good at holding on, it's not very good at letting go. So, for the job of transporting oxygen all over the body, from the lungs to the tissues, biology needed a totally different machine.
And that brings us to our second hero, hemoglobin. This is the protein that's packed into your red blood cells by the millions, and it is the body's premier oxygen taxi service.
And this is where the story gets really mind-blowing. If you take hemoglobin apart and look at just one of its building blocks, it looks almost exactly like myoglobin. It's uncanny. They're clearly cousins, part of the same ancient family of proteins. So what on earth makes hemoglobin a taxi while myoglobin a vault? The answer is teamwork. Hemoglobin is not a solo act. It's what we call a tetramer, a sophisticated four-part machine where all the pieces work together. This structure, this teamwork, is the secret to its amazing abilities. And this teamwork has a name. It's called cooperativity. It basically means the subunits talk to each other. When one of them grabs an oxygen molecule, it sends a signal to the others, changing their desire to grab an oxygen. They don't just act as four individuals, they act as one coordinated, intelligent team.
This communication allows hemoglobin to flip between two different forms or states. There's the tense state, or T state, which has that loose handshake and is good at releasing oxygen. And then there's the relaxed, or R state, which has the clingy handshake and is great at binding oxygen.
So what keeps it in that low affinity T state? A whole network of these things called ion pairs. You can literally think of them as tiny molecular staples that hold the subunits together in a tense shape that doesn't really want to bind oxygen. But when an oxygen molecule does manage to bind, it starts to break these staples, which lets the whole complex relax and shift into that high affinity R state.
And this whole system is just exquisitely tuned for your body. Think about it. In your lungs, where oxygen is everywhere, it's easy for hemoglobin to flip into that relaxed, high-affinity state. It loads up on cargo until it's about 96% full.
But then, that same hemoglobin-packed red blood cell travels out to your tissues, your muscles, your brain, where oxygen levels are way lower. The low oxygen environment triggers it to shift back to the tense, low-affinity state, and it starts dropping off its cargo. Its oxygen saturation plummets all the way down to about 64%.
That massive drop from 96% down to 64%, that is the whole point. That's the delivery. On every single round trip from the lungs to the body and back, hemoglobin efficiently unloads about a third of its oxygen. That's a delivery service that the super clingy myoglobin could only dream of. So when you pull it all together, what you're seeing is one of the most beautiful principles in all of biology. The physical structure of a machine perfectly defines the job it can do. Structure dictates function. This quote from the source material nails it. This ability to change its oxygen binding, to modulate it, is what it's all about. And the huge functional leap, from a simple storage vault to a sophisticated delivery taxi, all came from one key evolutionary innovation, going from one unit working alone to 4 units working as a cooperative team. And that really just leaves us with this incredible thought, doesn't it? This design principle of building complex and dynamic functions by getting simple parts to work together as a team is absolutely everywhere in biology. It makes you wonder, what other amazing molecular teams are working inside of you right now to keep the whole show running?